Christian reacts to Warhammer 40k. Now this is Lorestream's video, so of course this all credit goes to him, and let's see if we can get him a few more subscribers and likes on his video. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started.
Each of the Emperor's Primarchs embody their father in one way or another, and while it may be true that Leman Russ was the Emperor's executioner, exemplifying his honor and nobility when justice had to be dealt out to keep the peace and order of the Imperium, Lion El Johnson is his father's exterminator, displaying the unwavering loyalty to humanity's future and the master of mankind's dream of unification.
Now, I do believe, I guess as they revealed, her Games Workshop, he's awake. So it's not just Roboot Goleman anymore. It's Lion El Johnson as well, so that's kind of cool. They're starting to wake up, I guess, huh? Too bad humanity can't wake up.
And ascension over chaos, a loyalty which the Lion will pursue by any means necessary, and which, by his own admittance, is its own reward. When the Emperor's sons were cast into the warp by the dark gods of the Immaterium, pulled from their father's side and care by cruel destiny, the man that would become Lion El Johnson would, like many of his brothers, not come to land on a peaceful world. Instead, the Lion's birthing pod would be waylaid on Caliban, a death world in proximity to the chaos taint that was the Eye of Terror, the warp rift created by the birth of the chaos god of excess, Slaanesh, that you can learn about in our video on the Eldar Afterlife. To say that the Lion was presented with a bad hand, even when weighed against the fates of his other brothers, is not an understatement, perhaps only beginning to appear so when compared to the likes of
Oh, that would be cool to have that as a pet. Just saying. That thing will probably eat you one day, but you know, might be cute when it was little.
Or Mortarian. Caliban had few centers of civilization,
Little baby.
owing entirely to the warp corruption that had spread into the
Something.
very essence of the planet itself.
Lion.
Rise to great chaos abominations known as the Beasts of Caliban. These beasts would terrorize the people of the planet long after humanity's ruin during the
can see
adventures
that.
of night, creating a constant struggle for survival. Because of this, the Lion would find himself crash landing in the predator-filled forest.
Okay, that makes sense. That just hit me. Duh. I guess that's why he's called the Lion, maybe?
Planet, entirely cut off from human communication. The Lion has never revealed how he would manage to survive his early years, or combat the many dangers that they would have presented, with some claiming it was only through the aid of chaos that he did so, though this can likely be discounted by the fact that the Emperor himself would later remark that, among all his sons, Johnson was the only one who would truly never fall. What is known is that by the age of 10, that the Lion would be discovered by a group of Caliban knights, now known only to history as the Order. Despite being a pseudo-feudal world, Caliban...
Is that why the Dark Angels are so gung-ho about finding all the traitor Dark Angels? Or the fallen angels, I should say? Huh. It makes sense, I guess, huh? They didn't want to see, you know, them, or they wanted to put the, or I guess they're putting the image out there of their Primarch, I guess, huh?
Of partial
that makes any sense.
From the dark age of technology that would allow their warriors to create and equip proto-power armor, bolters, and other armaments. It was likely only because of this fact that the people of Caliban were able to survive at all, through the protection of their various chivalric orders. Many among the group that discovered...
I do need to do some more research on that Lion El Johnson here. I haven't done, you know, I did the Ezekiel and stuff like that, but I didn't really dig too much into the Dark Angels like I should have. So, anyways.
Lion Johnson would fear that he was just another beast of chaos, stating that no child could survive on its own in the woods of the world for so long. Despite the general consensus among the knights that the Lion should be put down, one notable hero from among the group would argue against this cruel course of action. The knight Luther, a recent widower, would go on to become the Lion's adoptive father, mentor, and the man who would set the Lion on his path to greatness. It was Luther who would refine the Lion's feral ferocity and innate talent into the skills of a noble combatant. The Lion would be an apt student in all things, learning the language of his adoptive people in mere weeks, despite never having spoken before, but it was in the ways of tactics and war that he would soon most excel. Luther and his adoptive son would go on to accomplish many great quests, over time even rallying the many knightly orders to their own, through their growing renown. However, by the time Johnson had reached adulthood, he had begun to eclipse even Luther in fame and prowess. Still,
I like
Luther would begin to
the
feel
way
some
he
resentment towards
sounds.
this fact. It would only be summoned
It's
20
like
years later before this would
ambient,
surface.
right? And you
During
feel
their
like
remaining
you're
time on
in
Caliban, Luther and the
listening
Lion
to a
would
story.
embark upon a great
You know, I like
crusade
this.
against the beast that had plagued their world for so long.
If only I
With
was
the
this
Lion
good.
at the head of the Order's armies, the once impossible dream of a peaceful world seemed to be in reach. Only one group would prove to oppose the Order's goals. The last remaining knightly order to deny being brought into the Lion's Own was that of the Knights of Lupus.
Yeah, these guys do lore 100 times better than I do, man. I am your wiki text-to-speech, basically, with biblical lore, right? Anyways,
These knights had struck a deal with an ancient
that's
piece
the
of
only
16th
thing that
archaeotech
sets
known
me
as the
apart.
Ouroboros,
It's the
that had long
biblical lore
ago,
stuff.
in ages forgotten, been
Trust me,
burned
I
to
know
Caliban's core.
I ain't the
The
best
Knights
lore
Lupus were
guy.
proved to be corrupted by the teachings of the Ouroboros and had begun to
I
tame the
do,
beast of Caliban, along
I
with
do
40
need to
of the
get
men of
better at it.
chaos.
It'd be
Despite
cool to
this,
do
the
something
Lion's
like
Order would
this
prove to
with
be
the biblical
victorious,
lore,
scouring the Knights Lupus from the face of Caliban. Still, Luther would go on to admit that, had the Knights of Lupus been able to summon demons, as the discovery of a number of their tomes would later prove that they were dangerously close to doing, that it would have been them, and not the Order, who had been victorious. It was in the keeping of these ancient tomes, and in the lying about it to the Lion, that Luther would commit his first betrayal. Shortly after the purge of the Knights of Lupus and the remaining beasts of Caliban, the Lion would be declared the supreme Grand Master of the Order and become the de facto leader of Caliban, much to Luther's increasing disdain. As fate would have it, it wouldn't be long after this that a number of the Emperor's expeditionary scouts would discover Caliban and the Lion. Upon hearing his scouts' recountings, the Emperor himself would then voyage to the planet, knowing that he had rediscovered another son. After this, the Lion would immediately bend the knee in fealty, instinctively knowing that the master of mankind was his gene-sire. After the Emperor appraised his...
In the comments below, let me know if you read the book Master of Mankind and who's your favorite character. I kind of like the Baroness when she was in the prison there. I don't know, just the way she carried herself. Anyways.
son, and deemed his accomplishments worthy, the Lion would be granted command over the Dark Angels, then known as the First Legion. Having been crafted before all others, the Space Marine warriors who would become the Dark Angels would be named after an old Caliban myth by both Luther and the Lion. The gene seed of the Dark Angels had been the first created by the Emperor, and their legacy was an ancient one, dating back to the ending periods of the Unification Wars on Terra, with their inception dating at least 100 years before that.
Dang.
Inheriting their gene father's penchant for secrecy, the Terran-drawn Angels had created an almost Byzantine-like hierarchy of ranks and suborders. The Emperor himself had recognized this tendency and further subdivided the First Legion's numbers into a group known as the Hexagrammaton, a group of veterans who did not fall directly into the hierarchy of the Legion proper. Lion El Johnson would see this and approve of it, only deigning to further refine on his father's design by integrating the customs and complex reputation-based hierarchies of Caliban's chivalric orders into the foundation of his Dark Angels. At first, however, the Lion would not be granted full control of his sons, for they were scattered across the planets of the Great Crusade, and thus he first had to undertake the task of seeking...
That is interesting. So God's name in the Hebrew or whatever, you call it the Tetragrammaton. So it had nothing to do with the Hexagrammaton, but anyways, kind of cool, I guess.
...out and reuniting them all. A man of action and not words, the Lion would personally challenge and defeat the chapter masters of each and every Dark Angel's fleet that he reabsorbed into his own in order to earn their respect. By the time the Lion had finished his marshalling of his legions, he had gathered together a force of nearly 500,000 Space Marines under his banner. This number was further reinforced by the recruitment of a number of Caliban Knights who would prove worthy of Space Marine augmentation through a series of trials conceived of by the Lion himself. Those worthy knights who would prove young enough to undergo gene seed implantation would be granted the honor. Those who were too old, such as the Lion's adoptive father, Luther, would instead be genetically enhanced, forging them into warriors only slightly inferior to the Space Marines themselves. It was through this process that Luther would once again be raised to the rank of the Lion's second-in-command. Although his resentment, in the face of realizing the boy he'd saved, had once again proven to outshine him, only this time on a galactic scale, continued to eat away at Luther. The Lion would lead his reunited legion across the stars, cracking the worlds that were too far gone to be reclaimed,
The best always
underneath
wins.
his heel, and breaking the spirits of those who were close, but not entirely, out of the reach of salvation once they'd been brought into line through force. The Dark Angels requested no honors allowed, but, just as the Lion himself would take a secret pride in being considered for the position of War Master, which was the overall commander of the Primarchs and their legions, being the only Primarch other than Horus, who would actually claim the title, that his brothers deemed worthy and tactically capable enough to lead them, so too did the Dark Angels ever seek greater victories in the service of mankind to fuel their own secret pride. No task was too dark for them, no necessity would prove to be too brutal, and while the Lion would remark that he truly...
That's why they're called the Dark Angels. And the fact that they hide their treachery or their traitor brothers Anyways,
truly loved each and every one of his
if I can
sons,
speak
that he was
English.
entirely proud of them, and that they only ever raised his expectations with every feat of bravery and skill. He also remarked that he not once regretted their deaths in the name of the Emperor. It was only in the waning years of the Crusade, but before Horus would stage his great rebellion
That reminds me of those clowns. Those evil looking clowns. Yikes.
against Terra, that the Lion would face a betrayal of his own. At first, the planet of Sarash would seem
And I guess you ain't cheating on that girl right there. She'll see everything, man.
relatively compliant towards conquest. The governors of the world agreed very early on to be taken into the fold of the Imperium, but they would then prove to continuously cite an incredibly complex bureaucracy as an excuse for further and further delaying the process of properly joining the Imperium. The Lion and his Dark Angels would discover almost too late that the government of Sarash was deeply infested with the servants of chaos. The planet's leadership had been stalling Imperial integration only for so long as they needed to attempt to summon forth a great warp.
Who is this? Someone could let me know in the comments. I definitely would like to know that. Interesting.
Demon into real space. Lion El Johnson himself was almost slain in the battle with this half-born entity, only being saved by the intervention of a psychic attack waged by the combined forces of his Psyker Space Marines. Still, the Sarashian government would still yet almost slay the Primarch when they snuck an atomic warhead aboard his flagship, even before the summoning of their daemon patron. Luther would learn of this warhead's existence before the Lion, but would hesitate to tell his adoptive son of its existence. He would eventually come to his senses and intervene to save
Watch
the
his
Lion,
name would have
but
been
Johnson
before
would
that
soon
and I just
discover
didn't
his
hear it.
hesitancy and exile him to Caliban under the
Happens
pretense
all the
of training
time.
new Space Marine recruits in response. It was on Caliban that Luther would grow further still in his resentment. As the Great Crusade waged for another 50 years, he would feel even more deprived of the honor that had once been his above all others before the coming of the Lion. When the combined forces of Horus and the Space Wolves would call for aid on the planet of Zaramund, Luther, in an attempt to actually accomplish his duties as a warrior, would take his exiled forces to aid the other Marine chapters. Luther would prove instrumental in the battle, but the Lion would appear afterwards to admonish the man for leaving his post without the Primarch's direct approval. He would go a step further in his rejection of Luther's actions by stripping him of the command of his fleet and once again stationing
I can see why the Emperor likes him so much, huh? Nice.
him on their homeworld. But while the Lion was fighting his father's crusade, the original noble families of Caliban were growing in resentment as well. In response to their planet being industrialized and their losing most of their peasant serfs, the nobles had lost the majority of their wealth as well. This would come to a head in the form of a minor revolution, in which Luther's own life was just barely saved by a number of loyalists who were able to warn him in time of a coming assassination attempt. The fact that the Lion's absence had allowed the planet they'd once worked together to secure peace for, had allowed that same planet to nearly erupt into civil war, led Luther down a path of further distrust and betrayal. Luther would continue to study the chaos tomes of the falling knights of Lupus, eventually coming to realize that the entire planet of Caliban was infused with the touch of chaos, and that, in fact, the attempt on his own life had been largely led by a number of chaos cultists who had managed to infiltrate the imperial government of his home planet. It was this fact, and perhaps a growing influence of chaos within his mind, that would lead Luther to believe that the Imperium would soon turn on Caliban. This thinking was largely in response to the Edict of Nicaea, in which the Emperor declared, mostly in his frustration with his son Magnus, that he would destroy anyone or anything that defied his decree, that sorcery and chaos was to never be practiced again in his empire, on the pain of death. Putting his loyalty to Caliban above all else, Luther would begin to rally the Space Marines and government of the planet to his side, slowly eroding their loyalty to the Lion.
Those are some cool looking helmet designs there. Reminds me of I think it was I can't remember what that's from. There used to be a helmet you could get, I do believe, in EverQuest or something like that, I forget. Anyways,
While Luther was securing Caliban under his own rule, the Lion was learning of his brother Horus's betrayal and defection to chaos. Initially, the Lion would achieve a great tactical victory against Horus by capturing the forge world of Diamant. Diamant held Horus's only source of the siege weapons that he would need to breach the defenses of Terra, without which he would never be able to reach and combat the Emperor of Mankind. Unfortunately, the Lion would give these same siege weapons to his brother Perturabo in exchange for him supporting the Lion's bid to replace Horus as the War Master of the Loyalist forces. Perturabo, however, secretly owed his allegiances to Horus. The lion would further find himself incapable of stopping Horus when the Ruin Storm, a great warp
So is he a double agent? That's what it sounds like. Well, something like that. Maybe not
directed
exactly.
by the
But
World Bearer Space Marines, would cut the majority of the Loyalist Primarchs and their forces off from the human homeworld by rendering the Astronomicon, the navigation beacon that made faster-than-light travel possible, inert. Cut off from communication with the Emperor, and, unable to reach him or ascertain his fate, the Lion would be convinced by his brother Guilliman to form a new Imperium known as Imperium Secundus. Guilliman feared falling into the same hubris that had led to Horus's fall, and so he requested that the Lion be crowned the new regent of Secundus. This honor would, however, fall to the Primarch Sanguinius, with the Lion instead becoming Secundus's Lord Protector, and Guilliman being its Lord Warden. In a further attempt to isolate the Primarchs of Imperial Secundus from Terra, Horus would divert the forces of the Primarch Conrad.
and of course, they would give it to the most beautiful man, or the most handsome man, I guess I should say.
Curse to the eastern fringes of the Empire to distract the Lion and his brothers. Conrad would evade capture for quite some time, wreaking havoc on a number of Loyalist worlds, and even being behind a number of suicide bombings on Guilliman's homeworld of Macragge. It would be the Lion who would eventually hunt down Curse, crush him in battle, and drag him to stand trial before his brothers. However, upon discovering that Curse had prophesied that he would die from an assassin sent...
Is that a dragon behind him? Huh.
By the Emperor, the Lion would beg his brothers not to execute Curse. He did this because he believed that Conrad's prophecy proved the Emperor was still alive, and feared that by changing Conrad's fate, that it might change the Emperor's as well. For this reason, the Lion instead agreed to become Conrad's jailer. When Sanguinius would later receive visions from the Emperor, further proving his survival, the trio of Primarchs would dissolve Imperial Secundus, and each of the three would instead attempt to lead their forces through the Ruin Storm to reach Terra. The Lion would once again be stopped by Horus's maneuvering, as at every turn the traitorous Warmaster was able to delay the Lion's journey to Terra. In a fit of rage and frustration, Johnson would turn to attacking planets that had fallen under Horus's rule, in an attempt to draw off the traitor forces from the...
I wonder if Horus knew because of the other guy, that double agent guy. Darn it, terrible with names, so... anyways.
The Siege of Earth. This would prove to be a mistake, however.
At least that's what it sounds like to me.
As when the Lion did eventually reach Terra, he would prove too late to intervene in the battle between the Emperor and Horus. The Warmaster was eventually slain by the Emperor, but in return, Sanguinius had fallen, and the Emperor of Mankind was left unable to leave the Golden Throne, reduced to a half-living corpse surviving only via the life support systems of the throne itself. While the Lion was fighting the forces of Horus across the galaxy, Luther would once again defy his Primarch's order during the Second Battle of Zeramund. Luther's forces would find the planet split between those loyal to the Emperor and those loyal to Horus. The Dark Angel would manage to establish order on the planet. However, upon journeying back to his homeworld, would discover the warship of Kalis Typhon of the Death Guard. Kalis, loyal to Horus, professed to be fleeing from loyalist Dark Angel forces sent by the Lion. He asked Luther for aid, seeking for the man to turn against the Lion, and even giving him a cursed, chaos-corrupted dagger known as Lifebane that Kalis claimed could even kill a Primarch, and requesting that Luther use it to assassinate the incoming Dark Angel commander. Luther refused to pledge himself to Horus, however, and would instead lie to his loyalist brothers and tell them that he had driven the Death Guard forces away, allowing their escape. As the Horus heresy came to a close, the Lion would return to Caliban in shame for his failure to protect the Emperor. To his surprise, the planet's orbital defenses would quickly fire upon his ships, forcing them out of orbit. Upon discovering that this was no mistake, and driven into a rage that was likely just as much fueled by the Emperor's death, the Lion would direct his cruisers to once again ascend into the atmosphere, and to begin shelling his homeworld in retaliation. As his ships tore the crust of Caliban asunder, the Lion would descend to the surface to challenge Luther, and the heavily guarded monastery that once housed the Lion's own knightly order. Luther would intercept the Lion's troops with a number of traitorous Dark Angels, who would come to be known as the Fallen. Luther himself, empowered by chaos and the discovery of his own latent psychic potential, would then engage the Lion in a brutal duel. The Lion would manage to fight his former mentor to a standstill, before pressing him further into what seemed like...
Okay, maybe now I'm seeing why he's called the Lion, man. That guy's gone through a lot of battles. Battling a lot of high-end people.
Like a victory. However, Johnson could not bring himself to strike down Luther, and, in that moment of hesitation, Luther would unleash a horrific psychic attack that would leave just enough of an opening for him to mortally wound the Lion. In the final moments before Luther could unleash Lifebane upon the Lion and slay him.
Of course, somebody who's butthurt because somebody's better than him would use that. Those kind of coward tactics.
Permanently, Luther too would hesitate. His mind would then break under the weight of realizing what he had done, and he would collapse in defeat alongside his Primarch. Caliban, meanwhile, would suffer no better fate than either the Lion or Luther. Shelled relentlessly by the Dark Angel Armada, the planet had already begun to break apart as Johnson and his one-time second clashed. A great warp storm would also break out as Caliban was cracking apart, in what was long thought to be the
Moment of silence. Okay.
rage of the Chaos Gods at their failure to truly slay another Primarch. The warp storm would rend Caliban asunder and scatter Luther's fallen Dark Angels across all of time and space. Only one small piece of Caliban would remain, as it had been protected by the shielding of the monastery that Luther and the Lion had done battle within. This fragment of Caliban would come to be retrofitted for space travel and
Space
used as the central base
Cthulhu.
of operations for the Dark Angels. Lion El Johnson would also be entombed, though not entirely dead, within the bowels of this spacefaring piece of Caliban. Interestingly, a race of seemingly unkillable beings known only as the Watchers in the Dark would reveal themselves and prove to be the ones that saved the Lion from the warp storm that ushered in the final destruction of his homeworld. These same Watchers would go on to stand
Yikes.
guard over the sleeping Lion for the next 10,000 years. After their Primarch was nearly slain,
So Caliban almost kinda somewhat got the Cadia treatment, huh?
the remaining Dark Angels would spend the next 10,000 years hunting down their traitorous brothers. The Dark Angels and their successors have since been known to place the capture of the Fallen above almost any other strategic objective. These captured Fallen are then, by doctrine, to be brought back to the Rock to be interrogated. Those of the Fallen that repent are generally given a quick death. Those that don't suffer a much longer and worse fate. In the same way, the surviving Luther is held deep in stasis within the Rock, only being awoken to be interrogated much the same. But the very much insane Luther has claimed for millennium that he will only repent before Johnson himself, and often proclaims that the Lion's return is soon at hand. Regardless of their attempts to rectify the past however they can,
Well, he has returned, I guess, huh?
the Dark Angels of the 40th millennium absolutely refuse to speak of their dark history to almost anyone. Few know of their secrets, with the chapter even going so far as to prevent their own members from fully learning of the full story of their past until they have proven themselves by becoming a member of the elite group of veterans known as the Death Wing.
The Deathwing are like the special forces, right? If I remember correctly. And they're made up of all different chapters, right? Space Marines and stuff. I do believe, right? Yeah, I think so.
Sometimes
And they wear the Titan armor, right? I do believe. I think it's called the Titan armor. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong on that in the comments there.
1,000 years after the fall of the Emperor and the Lion, a fallen Dark Angel known only as Cypher would reveal to his former chapter that the Rock housed an ancient warp drive formerly used by Johnson in secret, known only as the Tukulka. He would also reveal that, when combined with two other ancient devices, that the Tukulka would be able to reshape time and even reverse the fate of Caliban. The Dark Angels would assemble this reality-bending device, but would be halted in its use by the
Terminator.
intervention of a number of surviving
Sorry. Terminator armor. Okay. My bad. Not the Titan armor.
Fallen, who sought to use the device to bring all the scattered Fallen back to the current timeline. The loyalist Azrael would order the Tukulka to scatter the Fallen and to close the time rift that its activation had created. However, Azrael was not
Hasta
specific
la
enough, and
vista,
this led to the Fallen from
baby.
10,000 years ago also being scattered in the first
My
place,
terrible Arnold
retroactively
voice.
creating the warp storm that ensured the destruction of Caliban in a sort of closed time loop. Interestingly, when the former chapter master and member of the Fallen, known as Astellian, was captured by the Dark Angels, he would later go on to tell a story that painted Luther in a much better light than the conventional tale. Astellian would claim that it was he who had given the order to fire upon the returning Lion at Luther's behest. He explained that he believed the Lion hadn't been as noble as was once thought, even by the Emperor. He professed that he and Luther truly thought that the Lion had only been so slow in returning the
Sure.
tale, not because Horus had prevented him from doing so, but because he wanted to see which side would likely come out on top. Astellian further claimed that the Lion would have chosen Horus's side just as easily had it seemed like the traitorous Warmaster would be the victor. Though the current secretive nature of the Dark Angels leaves much to be suspect about in relation to their history, it is unknown if Astellian's account is more accurate than their own. Chaos does, however, have a tendency
Gotta
to
love
portray its
Warhammer.
victims in such a way as to make them truly believe that they are in the right, and Astellian's accounting may very well be just another example of this. Notably, following the events of the creation of the Great Rift, a large hole in real space that sundered the galaxy and leads directly into the chaos-infested warp, the demon prince Marbus would lead an assault on the Rock that would succeed in freeing Luther. It is now suspected by the Dark Angels.
Do you know what faction Marbus is part of? I'll have to look that up.
Due to a number of visions from their librarians,
I don't know why
Luther
I'm
is reassembling the
asking
scattered
you
following
guys
from
like you
throughout
would
the
answer
Wolven
now.
beyond. It is not known what Luther intends to do with this army, but some believe that it would be large enough to throw the weakened Imperium of the 41st millennium into abject chaos. It is not known if or when the Lion will awaken. In the end, he was a man who
Oh, he awake.
was as slighted by destiny and loyalty as his own true father had been, a victim of his own rage at others not doing what he perceived as best for the galaxy, much as the Emperor was at times known to be. It was in his own failings to share his motivations with those around him that would ultimately lead to his being betrayed and failed by those closest to him. Again, much like the Emperor was also betrayed by his own son and forced upon the Golden Throne just to survive.
Alrighty.
Thanks for watching to the end, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe, as it's only the first in the series on the Primarchs, and we'll be doing videos on all of them and more in the days to come.
Awesome. I really like this guy. Lore Masters, if you by chance see this, you do it. It's good job, man. Good job. I am envious. But anyways, guys, if you can, show him some support. He's only got like 1,004 subscribers, so I guess we can add more. You know, not like I can add, 1,000 or something like that. But let's get him a few more subscribers if you guys can. Anyways, guys, thank you guys for watching, and you guys have a wonderful day.